Hello there my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this wirework beaded bead that can have so many different results just with a basic technique and depending on the materials that you choose. And I'm also going to show you how to turn this into a link so you can create a beautiful chain with this bead. Now also, just to let you know, all the pieces featured in this video will be available for sale in my shop. Link will be in the description box below the video. Otherwise, if you want to learn how you can make your own, then keep watching. So I'm going to start out showing you the basic technique for how to make the beaded bead that you can use for a pendant, earrings, a charm, or anything else you can think of. And the materials we're going to need is first of all some wire, and the one I'm using here is a 0.6mm regular round silver coated copper wire. And then of course we also need the beads that we want to use. So I've got some 6mm rounds, and these specific ones are coated quartz gemstone beads. And for the one I'm demonstrating here, I'm going to be using 8 in total per bead, but you can easily use more or less or even a different size depending on the look that you want. Now of course we also need some pliers, so I've got my flush cutters here so we can cut our wire, chain nose pliers to manipulate the wire with, and then I'm using 6-step bell making pliers for any loops we need to make, but you can of course use round nose pliers for this as well. All the tools and materials will be listed in the description box below the video, along with useful links as well. Now the wire I'm just leaving attached to the reel, that way we have minimum wastage, but of course you can cut off a length if you're more comfortable with that. And then I'm going to bring in my beads here because we need to add them onto the wire. So just take one bead at a time, add them onto the wire that's still attached to the reel until they're all on there, and then just push them down a little bit so we have a short little tail here. And then I'm going to start to bring them around in a circle. So we bring the two outer beads basically side by side and just help guide it along the way and get the circle as nice and even as possible. So it looks a little something like that. Then from here we just need to bring in our chain nose pliers, and the short end here, what I'm going to do is grab right next to where the bead is and then bend that up and away from all the beads here. And then the other end we have here is still attached to the reel, and that's the one we're going to be working with. So make sure that all the beads are pushed all the way down, and then we need to fasten this in place by bringing this wire around the other wire that we just bent right down next to the beads. So something like that. And then we need to get into the pattern of overlapping the wire and crisscrossing it here. So that is then coming down on the other side here. So I'm just going to bring it downwards kind of in between the beads, and then count 2 beads from where the wire is coming from, and then go in between those 2 beads there. And what I'm going to make sure to do as well is also hold the wire down so it doesn't kind of slip over the beads, but just make it nice and tight. And then bring it up on the other side, so if you could call this the front, and then again in between those 2 beads. Now we need to cross over to the other side, and I'm counting 3 beads from where I'm coming from, so up towards where that short wire is, and go down in between those 2 beads. Again, hold the wire nice and tight, and then I need to come on the other side and count 2 beads, and then push the wire nice and tight down, come up between those 2 beads, back to the front, bring the wire over the front here, to the other side again. Now just move 1 bead down from where we were before. You can also count the 3 beads. Then come on the back again, count the 2 beads on the back here, which in this case is where we then have the other wire coming up. So go on the other side of that wire, make sure to push it down on the back. So we're just capturing around there. Now on the front, we're coming up between those 2 beads, and then move 1 bead down. So we have the 3 on this side, come down between those 2. And we continue like this. So on the back, we're always counting 2 beads and going between those. Make sure to push that down. And on the front, we're counting 3 beads and going between those, or just moving 1 bead down from the previous one. And just flip back and forth, and then we can start to see the patterns forming. And we just need to do this continuously until we make our way all the way back to the top and we complete the pattern. So remember, on the back here as well, push down the wire as we then go back to the front, move 1 bead over, push down the wire as we go to the back, count 2 beads, come back to the front. And now you can see we've met up with where we previously wrapped, but we still need to keep going because you can see the 2 sides are different. So to complete it, you just need to count the 3 beads or move 1 bead away from where we just were. And again, on the back, we count the 2 beads, come back to the front, and now we made it back up to the top here, so I'm going to go on the other side of that short length of wire that we left, and then come down on the other side, and you can see this has now completed the pattern, so it looks the same all the way around. And if we just flip this to the back, it also looks the same as all the way around. Now you can see the back and the front look slightly different, but they still both look equally nice. And now that we've completed the full round, we basically just got to finish off this wire here, and I'm just going to do that by wrapping this around that short wire that's coming straight out a couple of times, right as close to the wire and the beads down here as you can get. Just a couple of times until it's fastened securely. Then we can go in, cut off the excess, just make sure to push that little wire end down, and then we have this length here left that we can make a wrapped loop with. So just take your chain nose, go up a little bit from where that wrap was, put a bend into the wire. I'm grabbing my 6-step ball making pliers or your round nose pliers. I'm using the smaller step here for the loop. Then just bring the wire all the way around. So we create a full circle like that. Take your chain nose pliers again, put them on the circle, and then just start to wrap this around below the circle where we left that little gap of wire until we meet up with the other wrap that we did. And once we get there, we can go in, cut off the excess of this one, and just make sure to push that end down as well. And there we then have our finished beaded bead and ready to attach to whatever you want to. So these will be really cute little pendants or earrings, or even just a charm on its own. And you can also make them look very different than this. So you can use different size beads, smaller or larger, and you can also use more or less, and that will really change up the look. And then of course you then just use that loop there to attach it to wherever you want. Next, I'm going to show you how to turn the beaded bead into a chain link that we can then use to create a whole chain with. And for that, I'm going to be using this regular round rose gold coated copper wire in a 0.6mm. Again, I'm using 6mm rounds for these links, and these specific ones are faceted purple coated hematite gemstone beads. And you can of course play around with the sizes of your materials that will then affect the final bead. So for this, we need to cut some links of our wire, and what I have here is 40 centimeters, and this will make one link. So to turn this into a chain link, we need 2 loops, and we're going to start out making the first one. So I'm going towards one end of my wire, and then I want to measure in about 10 centimeters from the end, roughly like that. Keep hold of that. And then that's the point where I want to take my chain nose and place them onto the wire. So just grab onto the wire and then put a bend of about 90 degrees in there. Then I'm grabbing my 6-step ball making pliers for the loop, or round nose pliers if that's what you're using. Place them, I'm using the smallest step, onto basically where the bend is, the long end of the wire, and then bring the wire all the way around. So we create a full circle like that, and then take the chain nose and grab onto that circle so it stays in place, and take the end here and just wrap it around below the circle a couple of times until it comes out to the side like that. Now from here, as you can see, that's the first loop. What we need to do is be able to add our beads onto these lengths of wire. So the one length that I just wrapped around is already going out to the side. The other one I'm going to push out to the opposite side. So the base is splitting apart like that. And this is going to be our starting point. And from here we now need to add our beads. So I'm just going to bring them in, and then we want to start adding them onto the wire. Now I'm going to add 3 on one side here. So this is the long end of wire. Just add 3 in total, one at a time, and let them drop all the way down to the bottom here. And then I'm going to add the remaining 3 on the other side of the loop. So that's the short end of the wire, like that. So we have the loop, and then we have 3 beads on either side. Now from here I'm going to then put a bit of shape into the wires, just where the beads are. We basically want to curve back towards each other and turn it into more or less a circle until the beads kind of meet back up there at the top, and we get a nice shape, something like this. Now from there I'm just going to keep hold of that, grab my chain nose pliers, and then on the short end here that's at the front that I'm holding on to, just put your pliers right after where the bead is, and then bend it upwards, straight up and away from the circle like that. And then from there we need to kind of fasten this in place by wrapping the long end around the short end that we just bent up. So bring them nice and tight together so they're sitting just how we want them to, and then just start wrapping this wire around where that bend is. So it looks something like that. We have the full circle and it's fastened in place, so it's no longer going to move around. Now we're going to go into doing the crossovers between the beads, and we're going to use the long end of wire here for that. So this is coming around from the back, so I'm just going to bring it around to the front here, and you can keep rotating your piece, hold however you need to hold it to make it most comfortable. And then I'm going to bring this over some of the beads, so I'm crossing over the middle there, and I'm counting beads, so I'm counting 1, 2, and going down between the second and third one, like that. And then on the back here, I'm going to push it in towards the middle, put a finger on it, and then kind of have it hug around that single bead and come back to the front in between those two beads that we skipped over. And then back in like this. Now cross over towards the other side, and every time we're doing that on the front here, we're skipping 2 beads. So again, 1, 2, and in this case I've then got the loop. What I'm going to make sure to do is just go on the opposite side of the loop to where we are, come towards the back, and then the back here again, we're just going to kind of hug the wire around that single bead and come back out to the front, and then skip over 2 beads again, come down between those 2. At the back, we're just hugging around the single one. And here again, we're at the loop, so I'm going to go on the opposite side of the loop. So as you can see on the front, we have wire coming from both sides of the loop there. And from there, we skip 2 beads again. Down between those, have the wire hook around the bead there on the back. Come up between those 2 beads to then skip over 2 beads again. Now go on the opposite side of this length of wire that's coming straight up, and on the back just hug around that bead. You can also keep track of where you are on the back mainly, and you can see on the front here we're almost back to where we started, but we're just missing a little bit of symmetry yet. So come up between these 2 and bring this over to the other side, skipping 2 beads at the top. Bring it to the back in between those wires, and then on the front here you can see it's nice and symmetrical all the way around. It's pretty much creating a star within the beads, but then I'm just going to make sure I hug around that last bead on the back like I did all the other times, and then in this case come on the other side of the wire that's sticking up, and I'm just going to take the remaining length here and wrap it around that wire to basically fasten it in place just a couple of times like that. And then when we're happy with that and it's nice and secure, go in and cut off the excess, and just make sure to push that little end down. And then all that's left to do is make a final loop now with this end that we left in the beginning. And I also like to make sure that I make this in the opposite direction to this one here, so you can see that's laying flat. This one I want to face the other way. So I'm going to grab onto the length of wire just a little bit above those wraps that we just made, bend this backwards, take my bail making pliers and put in the same step, so I make sure I get the same size loops, and bring that all the way around to get that full circle. And this is the point where if this is your first link that you're making, or you want to use it with something else, you can obviously just finish off the wrap loop now. But if you want to attach the links together, this is where I would then bring in previous links that I've made, and I would then attach them before I finish up this loop. That way you would avoid having to use jump rings as well. So just bring this all the way in. So we have these 2 attached now, and we're gradually creating our chain as we go. And then just go in, grab onto your circle there, and then just wrap what you've got left of this wire underneath the circle, filling in that gap that we left until we run into the other end and we run out of space. We can go in and cut off the excess, and finally just make sure we push that end down so we can't feel it. And that is then also how you would link them together. And that's then how you can make a chain link here and also connect them together. So this would, for instance, make a really cute bracelet, but you could also use them in combination with other types of links and make a feature of them, or even just use the extra loop to attach a dangle. And finally, I want to show you what else you can do with this technique. So for instance, using smaller beads and more of them could create this really beautiful effect that will look great as earrings. Of course, anything else you can think of. Now for this we need 2 different gauges of wire, and again I'm using regular round rose gold coated copper wire, and the first gauge here is a 0.8mm. This is going to be our base wire and give it more strength. And then I'm going to be using this 0.3mm to wrap with and give it that beautiful effect. And in this case the beads I'm using are 4mm rounds. Now specific ones are some blue coated hematite gemstone beads. And I'm going to be using 32 for one piece, so if you want to make earrings for instance, you would need to double that. And again, this is just what I'm demonstrating with. You can easily use different sizes and amounts and you'll get different results. So first we need to cut a length of a 0.8mm, and this is about 25 centimeters. Of course that will depend if you want the piece to be larger or smaller. You can always cut the wire accordingly. Now as for the 0.3mm here, I'm leaving that attached to the reel. That way we have minimum wastage. So I'm going to bring in my beads here, because what I'm going to do first is add all these beads onto my lengths of wire. Just add them one at a time until you got all of them on here. And then with all the beads on there, we need to shape this into a circle. So you can obviously do that freehand. You can also find something you have handy. So I have this bowl here where I find that the top works pretty perfectly size-wise to basically use as a mandrel. So just bring it all the way around, make sure the beads are nice and tight next to each other, and then the ends start to meet up again, and then that just gives you a nice circle shape. And from here we need to attach this, so obviously it's not going to be moving anymore. So to do that, I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and make sure all the beads are pushed nice and close together. On one end, right next to the bead, I'm going to take my pliers, add them on the wire and bend it straight upwards and away from the beads, so it looks something like that. And now make sure you grab onto the other length and push the beads down so we don't have any gaps around, because then attaching them together to create the full circle, I'm going to then keep hold of the wires here and then wrap this length around where we just put the bend in a couple of times, so we fasten the circle in place just like that. Then I'm going to go to the back here, just cut off the excess. We can get rid of that wire and just make sure to push that end down so we can't feel it with our fingers, it's not sticking out. And then we have the circle completed and secured. Now obviously you can just make sure that it is exactly the shape you want, so you can always readjust that. Otherwise we now need to bring in the 0.3mm wire and start wrapping around all these beads. Then grab your 0.3mm wire here, and the end I'm then going to put through the very center of all the beads here, so right in the middle, and then we need to first of all attach it at the top so we have kind of an anchor place. So right where our wrap is, the very first bead, I'm just going to wrap this a couple of times right next to that, but just around the base wire. Just fit it wherever you can, where you have a little bit of space, and a few times like that, and then I'm just going to leave this tail up and out of the way. Now I'm going to bring this around so we have the end that's still attached to the reel at the front of the piece, and then you can always just reposition however you need to, whatever's comfortable for you. Now we need to start doing the wrapping. So again, you can do this in different ways and it'll give you different results. How I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to be counting 10 beads from where I am. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to take the wire and then make sure it's nice and straight where it's crossing over, and then in between the 10th and 11th bead is where I'm going to bring it in between the two beads and then towards the back of the piece. And then on the back I'm going to go back upwards to the top, but now I'm going to move down one bead, but make sure again that it's nice and straight. So I'm coming up now, as you can see, one bead further over, and then bring it over the middle again and make sure that your wire is staying in between the beads. Now I'm then going to also step another bead further away from where I just wrapped previously. So instead of going between the same beads, I'm going to just step one bead to the side and go between those two, come towards the back. And now you want to make sure that these wraps we're doing are nice and taut, but it's also important that you don't pull too tight, because you can end up altering the shape here as we're wrapping all the way around. Now that is obviously why we have the stronger base wire going all the way through, but you could still end up changing the shape. So just make sure you wrap it nice and taut, but also not too tight. Now on the back, Again, it's crossing over, and we're kind of stepping down one bead, come up on the front, and then step down one bead there as well, making sure every time I'm crossing the wire over, I just like to smooth it out in case there's any little unwanted kinks or bends. Go between those two beads, come back towards the top, step down one bead, and as you can see, we are literally going to be going like this all the way around, and it's going to create this really beautiful pattern inside where the wire is just crossing over back and forth from front to back. And this is where you can also make it look very different. So for instance, like I said, I'm doing the gap of 10 beads between my wraps. You could also make a bigger or smaller gap, and that will make your piece look different. So that's completely up to you and your preference, but just keep going like this until we reach back towards the top where we started out. So I'm working my way around here, and I'm back towards the top, and as you can see, we haven't made it all the way around, but you could easily stop here if you like the way that this looks. This is also very beautiful, but I will continue, and I'm going to make sure when I reach between these two beads here, I'm going on the opposite side of the wire here that's going straight up, and then just come down again towards the back, move one bead over, and also on the top move one bead. And again, I'm just going to continue until the whole area looks like this. So I've now reached what's going to be the last wrap, so I'm coming up between the two beads that are next to the wrap down here, and I'm going to bring this around over the top of all the other wires. And the way you can also tell is right here between the two beads that I'm going to wrap between, you can see that's the only place left that hasn't got a wrap in this direction. So just bring the wire over and go between the two beads, and then come up to the wrap again, and then you can see as well that just finishes off that nicely. And I'm going to go on the other side of the wrap than where the wire is coming from, and now we basically want to secure this in place. So obviously these wraps are not going to come undone, so I can just go in and cut off the wire from the reel, just leave a short little tail so we have enough to just work with here. So first I'm just going to cut off the other end that I left right at the beginning to get that out of the way. So cut off the excess, and then just make sure if there's a short little tail sticking out that you tuck that in and out of the way. And then this one, what you want to do is basically just find anywhere that you can get this through in a little gap from this side back to the opposite side, so we can pull it all the way through and just secure it in place. And then you just want to wrap this a few times wherever you've got space. You can also do it in between the wrap that you already did, because this wire is very small, so it'll just tuck in nicely there. And then you want to just go in and cut off the excess of that, and of course just make sure to push the end down as well. And then what I also just like to do is make sure that this is going to be as tight and secure as possible. So on the two sides I like to just kind of push them together a little bit, just to make sure that they're really nice and tight around the beads, and hopefully shouldn't be moving and slipping around or anything, but they should stay in the place that we put them in. So just gently push them together a bit. And the final thing left to do is make a wrap loop with this wire we have at the top. So I'm just going to take my chain nose pliers and then push the wire back so we get a 90-degree angle like that. And then I'm taking my 6-step bell making pliers, place the smallest step on there, obviously whatever size you want yours to be. Bring that around so we create that full circle, and we have something that we can attach it to, or attach something else to this. Grab onto it with your pliers and then wrap the end, filling in that gap between the circle and the other wraps that we did. Then we just want to cut off the excess. And of course, make sure we just also push this little end in place like we've done all the other times. And there you then have your finished piece that you can turn into a really beautiful pair of earrings or a pendant or whatever else you can think of. So the effect looks beautiful in itself, but you can see with the reflection on the wire and the light shining on them, it really moves beautifully. And especially if you wear them as earrings, obviously they will move as you wear them and they'll just catch the light nicely. So these are just the 3 variations that I showed you. You can use this basic technique for the beaded bead for, but you can really play around with it and achieve so many more different results. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Now make sure to check out my channel. I have loads of tutorials within many different mediums of jewelry making. And you can always support me by subscribing, liking and sharing my videos. And there is also a super thanks button below if you'd like to help out that way. But like I said, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.